YouTube, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm giving you my top shelf tour. My top shelf is the fiction section of my bookshelf. Right now my entire bookshelf is just not organized enough for me to share it with you. So today I'm only giving you my top shelf, which is most of the fiction books that I own. I do own other fiction books. Some of them are on my TBR shelf because I'm planning to read them pretty soon. Most of these are books that I have already read. There are a few here that I haven't yet gotten to, but they're not books that I plan to read immediately. So they're here with my collection. A lot of these are favorites, books that I've read that I love, authors that I really enjoy. And so today I'm just going to share with you some of them. Another day I'll come back and I'll share my non-fiction reads, but today just fiction. Today is just about pure entertainment, pure filling up of the soul, filling up of the heart, filling up of all the feels, all the emotions. And look forward to hearing from you if you've read any of these books, if any of these are books that you absolutely love as well, and leave me a comment so we can talk about them. But for now, stay tuned. First book is Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He is one of my favorite fiction writers. He won the Nobel Prize for Fiction. Remember My Beauties by Lynn Hugo. I received this earlier this year in exchange for an honest review. I really enjoyed reading this book. I wanted to pass this on to someone else. I haven't done it yet. The next two books are self-published works by Glacita Hunnigan. The author is a friend of my mother's in Jamaica. And so this, I think, was her first work. This is Stop Blaming Me for My Mother's Sins. And this is another one of her books. It's entitled We're in America Now, Baby. Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I have owned this book for several years. I bought this used copy and I still haven't read it. One of these days I will. This book is supposed to be the greatest novel ever written, and I'm just afraid that if I read it and don't like it, that I won't know what to do with myself. Okay, so that's not true, but it's a daunting book. It is over 800 pages, so if you've read it, kudos to you. Eleanor Park by Rainbow Rowell. I have read several Rainbow Rowell books, and this is one of my favorites. I read a copy from the library, but I liked it so much, I went out and bought a copy for myself. Me Before You by Jojo Moyes. This is the book that started my love affair with Jojo Moyes books. I think I gave it a 4-star rating when I read it, but it was a story that just stuck with me. And I kept wanting to read more from her. I kept wanting to read more and more and more from Jojo Moyes. And so I read my way through like maybe half of the books that she's published so far. I first read a copy from the library, and then I love this book so much. When I heard that she was in town, she was doing a book signing, I went to Barnes & Noble and I bought this copy so that she could sign it. 100 Days by Nicole McInnes. This is an ARC that I received in exchange for an honest review. This is a coming-of-age novel about 3 teenagers, and one of them is about to die. They have 100 days to live, but nobody knows it yet. Emily Giffin is a really popular women's fiction writer. I remember not loving this book when I first read it, but I wasn't sure if maybe I read it in one of my little snooty phases, and so I decided that I would someday read it again and give it another chance, give Emily Giffin another chance to win me over, but I haven't yet. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I plan to reread this at some point. This is a Pulitzer Prize winning book. I don't own the sequel yet, because I'm not sure if I want to read it. This is David Sedaris' Me Talk Pretty One Day. This is very dry, droll, wicked, funny humor. The language is not for everyone. The language could kind of get to you, but I really like him as a writer. Then we get to Sold. Sold is by Patricia McCormack. She was a National Book Award finalist for this book, and she signed a copy for me. I met Miss McCormick when I was tutoring in the public school system. The students that I was tutoring were reading her book. She came to the school to sign copies. The story is about girls, Nepalese girls, who've been taken from their homes and sold into sex slavery. Usually they're sold by family members because the family is just too poor, and so they sacrifice one of the females to go and work. Sometimes they think that the girls are going to work as domestic helpers, maybe in some rich person's house, but they're really going into prostitution. This is written in little vignette and poetic form, but it's such a compelling story. If you get a chance to read it, I recommend it. I own a copy of the Odyssey by Homer, and I still haven't read this one. It's important that I own it, I just haven't read it yet. The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. This is about the Hmong people, Hmong. I had no idea that the Hmong people existed until I read this book. So the Hmong people, they immigrate to the United States and they live in little communities of their own people. They retain their own language, they retain their original culture. And so because they are not completely assimilated, so when they go to receive government services, like they go to the hospitals, they're not able to communicate. This book is really about these people who are living on the margins. They need to assimilate, but they're unwilling, they're resistant. Now we get to one of my favorite books, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. If I could recommend one book, one fiction book from this entire shelf for you to read, it would be this book. It is about a young man who goes off in search of his fortune, and he realizes that even after he travels like several countries over looking for his fortune, he discovers that his fortune was right where he started, because the fortune, his gift, is not an external thing, his gift is inside of him. This Is Where I Leave You by Jonathan Tropper. I think Jonathan Tropper is a really funny man. His language is terrible, but I think he is so funny. I think that he is a wonderfully talented writer. This is about a man who finds out that he has a heart defect and he needs surgery in order to live, but he chooses not to have the surgery because he thinks that he's run out of time and he doesn't want to spend any more time fixing himself. He wants to fix the relationships that he ruined with his ex-wife and his child. It is a very brilliantly written book, because the whole time you're reading this book, you're thinking, is he gonna die? Is he gonna die? And at the end, does he die? This Is Where I Leave You. Funny guy. This is a collection of short stories. This is the anchor book of New American Short Stories. They're very famous writers, very famous novelists' stories included in here, including Jhumpa Lahiri. She won a Pulitzer Prize with her debut novel. I think it was The Namesake that she won it for. But she's also on my TBR list for October. David Foster Wallace, you probably know him. Anthony Doerr from All the Light You Cannot See. Some very famous novelists' works collected here. This is Empire Falls by Richard Russo. He won the Pulitzer Prize for this book. I got this book when I was in college. I paid $1 for it at the bookstore. It's just such a complicated, layered story. I remember reading this book and thinking, this is what it's like, right? The great American novel. Julia Alvarez, How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accent. 3 girls who are born in the Dominican Republic. Their parents flee because there's some unrest in their country. They move to New York. The life of the immigrant, the life of trying to assimilate in New York City amongst other people who are trying to get them to leave their culture behind. Lord of the Flies by William Golding. This is about a group of kids who they're on their way to a school event. Their plane crashes and they survive, but they are stranded on this island. They don't know if anyone knows that they're alive, where they are, or how long it's going to take for them to be rescued. They have to figure out how to take care of themselves until help comes. It's a very interesting look at the human condition. How do we behave when there are no rules, when we could do whatever we want? Does organization, does rules, does government have a role in our lives, even if we lived in a very different society? I read it for the first time this year. There's a lot of incidents of violence, of emotional and mental struggle, emotional and mental torture. So I don't think the themes are necessarily for children, but I mean, who am I to say? These are 2 books that I have had for a long time. This is, I think, the only book that I brought with me when I left Jamaica. I remember reading it on the flight when I was coming from Jamaica to live in New York. And even though it's not a book that I probably would purchase now because it's an old copy, it's a Penguin classic, the pages are yellowed. I don't necessarily purchase these kinds of paperbacks very often, but I would never let go of it because it is sentimental like that. But amazingly enough, I have a sister copy of Dante, the Divine Comedy, which is the same publication, Penguin Classics, and I've never read this one either. So I've read this, I just haven't read this. I guess I'm saving this for when I read the Odyssey. Let me just say this, I'm not Buddhist, but this is one of my favorite books. It is about the story of Siddharta Gautama, the person who became the Buddha. Siddharta, he grows up in his father's house. His father is a Brahmin, and so the Brahmins, you know, they're respected leaders in their communities, and so he grows up in the lap of luxury in his father's house. And he grows up sheltered, protected from the realities of life, the struggles of life. And one day he sees a man who is poor. It's his first time seeing poverty, encountering poverty, and so he starts to feel uncomfortable with the disparity between his life and the life that other people live. And so he decides to leave home. He doesn't know what exactly he's looking for, but he's going off in search of enlightenment. The book is about his journey and his enlightenment as he becomes the Buddha. This is a 5-star rated book. Another 5-star rated book that I own is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. I first read a copy of this book from the library and I loved it so much. I purchased several copies of this book and gave them to family members and friends. Charlie has a low IQ, and there's some experimental research that's done. They do surgery to correct his mental deficiency, and so when he wakes up, Charlie is incredibly smart. How his life changes, does it change for the better or does it change for worse? What does he have to give up in order to be intelligent? This is the classic section of my shelf. I don't have a spot yet for Madame Bovary, but as usual, my bookshelves are in constant flux. They're always changing. This is Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. This is the Collector's Library edition from Barnes & Noble, and I love the size. I love the little gold lining on the sides, and I wish I'd bought more of these books when Barnes & Noble was selling them, but they discontinued the series. This part is my Jane Austen collection. This was the first Jane Austen that I purchased. This is Pride and Prejudice, and I purchased the mass market paperback because I was starting a Jane Austen book club with my friend, and after I purchased this, I then went on and bought some of the Barnes & Noble Classic series. This is Northanger Abbey, Sense and Sensibility, Mansfield Park, and Persuasion. I'm missing Emma, and I'd like to get this one in these series. So one of these days I'll add those to my collection. And then I have Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. This one I've always wanted to read. I haven't read it yet. I want to get The Great Expectations also. When I was growing up, my parents had both of those books, and I always said I'm gonna read them someday, and I still haven't, even though I own this one. So I want to get on that soon. I do love the classics. And oh my, this is a receipt from when I purchased Persuasion, Northanger Abbey, and Mansfield Park. I paid $12.96 for the 3 books. That's awesome. This was a buy 2 get the 3rd one free. So that's my classic section, and that was my fiction shelf. So oops. So thanks for watching my top shelf tour. Tomorrow I'm going to make you another video where I talk more about my non-fiction books, some of the books that I own, the reasons that I chose them, some of the lessons that I learned from them. And if you're looking for recommendations about non-fiction books, come back tomorrow for that. And if you haven't already, please subscribe so you'll know when I post my videos. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up, let me know whether or not you like my videos, okay? Thank you so much. See you later. Bye.